Great, thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight as we talk about Denver Initiative 2A, dealing with climate change. It's an honor to be here, and thank you to Servicios de la Raza for holding this really important forum and dialogue as we dig in a little bit more to why this is an important initiative in Denver and why we are coming together to support it. We'll start off with just a quick round robin, and you'll be able to meet each person who's going to be speaking tonight. I'll ask each of us to just say very succinctly why it is we're supporting Climate 2A, and then we can take a step back and really get into the nuts and bolts of it. I'm the facilitator tonight. My name is Danny Katz. I live in Northwest Denver. I'm the director of an organization called COPIR, the Colorado Public Interest Research Group, which we're a public interest advocacy organization. And I'm also the chair of the Denver Streets Partnership, advocating for people-friendly streets, busing, transit, walking, biking all across the city of Denver. The reason I'm here to support Denver Initiative 2A is because climate change, transportation is the single largest source of climate change pollution. And if we're gonna tackle that, we need to really ramp up the multimodal options that people have, not just in the core downtown parts of Denver, but really all across our city. We need to see better transit. We need to have safer sidewalks, and that's gonna take some funding. And Climate 2A is a great measure to be able to invest in our communities so we can tackle climate change from a transportation perspective. I'm joined by a number of other folks here. Amon, would you mind introducing yourself and saying why you're in support of Climate 2A?
Yeah, my name's Amon Lucero. I work over at the Corky Gonzalez Branch Library inside of the Idea Lab. Worked, or at least prior to our current circumstances, worked very closely with the public and offering services and tech training and help and support for those who are learning new technologies. When I first got the job, the reason why I'm in support of 2A is having got that job, we had just lost a car, and I was just transitioning over from Denver Public Schools as a teacher with DPS, and we just weren't in a position to purchase or to make another purchase, but we could afford a bike. So I went out and I got a bike, actually borrowed some money from my parents to be able to make that purchase, and then paid my dad back once the next paycheck came through. One of the things that I quickly noticed, though, was that although you can Google map like best bike routes to places, those routes aren't necessarily always in great condition or even safe. And so as someone who used, and I was training at that time for about 2 months out of the Central Branch Library, just off of Broadway there in front of the Capitol. And the recommended route, or there is a bike route, Denver does have some outlined streets that are more biker friendly than others. The route that I ended up taking was down 13th Street. And as you get closer towards the railroad tracks over there, again, it gets pretty dicey as far as the road conditions and also just visibility and safety out there. My first ride out to work, I ended up getting a hole in my tire. Didn't even know how to repair a flat or anything like that. There was a guy who was just hanging out at the corner who ended up helping me out, got me on my way. And so I really do think that, investing in safer, at least for me, that's the main motivation, is investing in safer, more accessible roads, in particular for bikes.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of folks like yourself who are trying to move around without driving a car and emitting some of that pollutants. And so investing in safer infrastructure definitely seems like an important piece of this. Nita, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit why you're supporting 2A? I think you're on mute.
Technology, right?
No problem.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nita Gonzalez. I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. My father was a Chicano civil rights leader in the Chicano movement, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez. The library is named after him. So I grew up in this place, and I have watched it evolve over the years, and but I'm also have been very much involved in environmental issues with Latinos and our Chicano Mexicano neighborhoods. And why I'm supporting 2A is because it brings together several elements that impact our communities that are often left behind when you talk about environment or changes or never considered. For instance, one of the things I like about it is a commitment to provide funds for our communities that don't always get those funds to deal with environmental justice issues, like along the river, the South Platte, where our community tends to live, in Globeville, Leary, Swansea, in Cole neighborhood, in Westwood, in Valverde, wherever, Sun Valley. We tend to not always be considered. And so in the last few years, we've become more actively involved around those issues. So it was both that, plus I like the idea about funding the ability to maybe train and have jobs available for our community in this new field, in this new path. And then the third thing that's important to me is what Aman was talking about. How do you create a community and neighborhoods that are safe to use alternative transportation, because not everyone can afford a car or keep a car going. But we don't have a good system either within Denver to transport or people to get from one place to another. And so those are the reasons I'm supporting 2A.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I mean, there's so many solutions to climate change that also provide solutions to some of the other challenges we're seeing. So it's great to hear some of the things you're highlighting. We're also honored to be joined by Councilwoman Amanda Sandoval as well. Councilwoman, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about why you're supporting 2A?
Thank you, Danny. Yes, I represent Danny. He lives in Northwest Denver, and Nita is my constituent. So, and the Corky Gonzalez Library is right on the edge, but you have Councilwoman Torres, so you're in good hands over there. So there's several reasons why I'm supporting 2A. The first one is my mom, when she was raising us, we always talked about the next 7 generations and how can I represent and how can I do work on city council for the next 7 generations of Denverites without a perpetual source of funding. So unless we have funding, then items and neighborhoods, since what Nita mentioned, get overlooked and historically have gotten overlooked. And so with a dedicated revenue and dedicated funding source, my hope is that we will bring these communities up to the standards that other communities already have. Another reason I'm supporting 2A is we all have heard about the wildfires in Colorado, and Denver has parks. We have parks in our mountains, mountain parks that provide accessibility for some of our inner city youth who are not able to go up into the mountains. When I was young, I used to go to O'Fallon Park, and that is a Denver city ran park. And unless we have resources and revenue to do fire mitigation there, those parks could be very vulnerable as well. And so when we're talking about all of the fires throughout Colorado, it would be a travesty to have Red Rocks burned down. It would be awful to have all of these other resources that we all take for granted if they were to start on fire and burn down. And the only way to do fire mitigation and create new jobs, similar to what Nita was talking about, is to have a dedicated funding source. So, and then the second reason I'm supporting this initiative is I have 2 children, and I want to teach them the importance of Mother Earth and being a caretaker. Unfortunately, we will not be able to do that in our current climate, no pun intended, unless we have funding. And so I believe I'm making an investment in my grandchildren and in my great-grandchildren.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this really is it's a big opportunity for us to make that investment. If you're watching, we're talking about Denver Initiative 2A, which is on the Denver ballot this November. And if you have any questions, please let us know, and we'll try to get your questions answered. One thing that we should establish right off the bat is what exactly is Climate 2A. So a couple of pieces that I want to make sure people are aware of. It's a sales tax. And so what that means, it's the equivalent of for every $100 you might spend in the Denver area, in the city and county of Denver, it would be about 25 cents on top of any $100 that you spend. It would create a pool of money somewhere in the $36 million range. And those funds would be earmarked for climate solutions. We're talking about renewable energy, things like solar panels. We're talking about electrification, so helping to move more electric vehicles onto the road and replace some of those dirtier gas-powered vehicles. We're talking about energy efficient buildings, which can not only reduce the amount of pollution we're emitting, but also save people money as we have better insulation and more efficient buildings. And then also transportation, so helping to create more options for people to get around our neighborhood and our city. One important point of Climate 2A, which a number of folks have already referenced, which is 50% of these dollars are earmarked to communities of color or communities that are most impacted by climate change to help bring equity to the solution here. So often communities have been left behind in the city and county of Denver. And so this is really an effort to pump dollars into those areas. There's also a component about jobs and trainings that's a big part of this as well. And so it's on the ballot this November, and we're asking people to vote yes on it. Again, vote yes on 2A. It's a long ballot, so you have to read down to get to it, but we're all voting yes on 2A. It's very important, not just for us, but for our future generations. I would love to just hear a little bit about how you all are seeing climate change impacting your community. I mean, one example is air pollution. I mean, we've certainly been impacted by that, but I'm wondering if Nita, you wanted to talk a little bit about how you're seeing climate change impact our communities and why it's urgent that we take action.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the communities I'm working with through, along with a couple other consultants, Jorge Figueroa, Paul Hellman, we just did a Zoom with families and youth out of Globeville area. And one of the solutions that that community has been talking about is that, you know, I didn't know till I started working with them that Globeville suffers from the lowest tree canopy. It has the least amount of trees in that neighborhood. So not only is it saddled with I-70 and highways and it's industrial, they don't even have the canopy that other neighborhoods have in the city that will lend to support or lend to help with air pollution and air quality. And then just add to it, like I said, the highways that go along that. So that's an example where I could see 2A absolutely helping communities come up with a solution or be involved and engaged in providing the solution for environmental issues in their neighborhoods.
Absolutely. Amon, are you seeing the impacts of climate change in your community where you live?
Sorry, I was muted.
No problem.
Yeah, you know, I was born and raised in Denver too. I think that's pretty common with a lot of the panel here. But I also moved around from place to place when I went to college and started my professional career. One of the things that, and it's interesting that you know, as I've heard and listened in on different talk radio and NPR, just a lot of talk around climate change and how it's happening, but it happens in a way where we almost just become okay with it in the sense that it gradually occurs. You know what I mean? It's not something where it's like just so dramatic that you know, we demand a change. Something we always complain about, you know, the changing weather or the hotter climates, but it's something that's just incremental, but the effects over it compounded over time really really do add up. And I remember, you know, being a kid, you know, not necessarily thinking of the summers being so hot and being just brutally hot. I mean, I remember many summers where that wasn't the case. But for me, I think that that's one of the biggest things. And then, you know, there's residual effects, you know, that go along with that. You know, when you have such dramatic climate shifts, I mean, even things just as a homeowner, I'm constantly thinking about, oh my goodness, do I put in my plants? Do I cover up my pipes? Do I need to turn up the heat? Do I need to, because if you don't, like even, for example, one of our the spigots in our backyard just froze with this last frost. That's like a $500 bill right there, to replace that pipe and to have a plumber come in and do all of that. Those are things that have not happened in the past. So, just those, again, dramatic shifts between hot and cold, also does a number on the roads. So I mean, those are the things that I've seen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's real cost to the extreme weather that we're seeing for sure. Councilman Sandoval, a lot of the money that will be raised is going to some really meaningful solutions. I mean, whether it's better transit in our community or solar or energy efficient buildings. Can you talk a little bit about how, as somebody who travels around this area quite often, how are these going to benefit the northwest part of Denver and where you serve?
So I think what Nita was talking about the tree canopy is really important. But also I think for people, especially seniors who are on fixed incomes, as they move into older homes, to update their air conditioning units, to update their furnaces, to update their stoves to be more energy efficient. Not only does it help the environment, it also helps our seniors who are on fixed incomes, who don't have that extra money to necessarily pay for all of those upgrades. But it sure will help out with amongst Northwest Denver. And in an area I don't represent, but that's near and dear to my heart, Gwilvillery and Swansea, having the windows replaced. Gwilvillery and Swansea has the highest amount of children who have asthma than anywhere else in Denver. And it's because a highway runs right in the smack middle of all three neighborhoods. And so getting better air quality in the house through better windows, through better ventilation in the home. And I will admit, I have an old home that I bought 18 years ago that has a gravity furnace. I don't even know if anyone on this call knows what a gravity furnace is. Maybe Nita does.
Why don't you explain it?
But a gravity furnace doesn't have a blower, so it just heats. It's a big box, and what it does is it works on the fact that heat rises, and so it's not energy efficient, and it's definitely probably not good for the environment. But I stayed at home for 9 years when I was raising my two children. I didn't start my career until my 30s. I was a stay-at-home mother. And my husband and I didn't have the money nor the means to be able to replace a furnace, which is about $15,000, $20,000 to get the infrastructure in that's needed. So for those moms out there who are staying at home and don't work because a whole entire paycheck would have to go to paying for your child to go to daycare, they hopefully could see some of the impact of this fund and be able to do home renovations that maybe one day my daughter just moved out. Now we'll be able to afford, but now we have college to pay for. So it's, everything always piles up. So I really, as a council person, it's important to me to be able to have resources and be able to offer new ways of thinking about things. I don't think, to Armand's point, you see them incrementally. But one thing that Denver is doing right now is most buildings have to be built, if you're within a floodplain, you have to do the mitigation on the site development plan, which actually costs more. And we have all of us in Denver who live in the city and county of Denver are paying more for our wastewater now because we are mitigating to 100-year flood, because now we are dealing with climate change. And so a lot of the infrastructure, the whole entire City Park golf course was updated so that area could be mitigated for 100-year flood, which was not, that's new. And that's due to climate change.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a real cost to inaction. I mean, if we don't do anything, there's going to be huge costs coming our way because of the changes due to climate change. I mean, for me, I live a block from I-70, and so air pollution is a big issue for me. And the more that we can get
So do I.
any vehicle that, say that again, Nita?
So do I. I live like half a block from I-70.
Yeah, and so the more that we can take, any vehicle that's on the road, if we can remove that tailpipe that's pumping that air pollution out, is a big step. And anytime we can have better transit service, I know that we definitely have some buses in our part of the city, but better bus service would really make a big difference in allowing people to actually leave their cars at home, or as Amon was saying earlier, ride their bike. If you're tuning in, we're talking about Climate 2A, and we're asking people to vote yes. It's really important. $36 million of investments every year moving forward, if we approve this, to go to some really important solutions. Rita, were you going to say something? Or Nita,
Well,
sorry,
I was going to say that the other issue that I think is real critical is the ability to have access to solar. I mean, how many of our communities, senior citizens, those that are working paycheck to paycheck, really can even consider, but able to educate and also make that available for them. I'd love to try and access that, but it's fairly costly. And we have to find a better way so that it's more equitable. And I firmly believe, I voted yes on 2A because I firmly believe that this is a way to do that.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I mean, 2A allocates, specifically says 50% of the dollars that are raised must be used in communities of color and communities that are most vulnerable to climate change, communities that have not been as invested in as other parts of the city. Nidhi, we're already talking about this a little bit, but why is that so important based on just the history that we have here in Denver?
Well, we've not, as I said, historically, I was born and raised here as well, and I've seen the shift in climate and weather, water, access to water. But whenever there were upgrades or new ways to do things, our communities were always left out, communities of color. And we're in a city where we're almost 40% Latino. And that has to stop. We're not just living in one part of the community. We've moved out throughout the city, hoping that we don't have to move out of the city, giving housing prices. But wouldn't it be great to be able to work in partnership with our council people and with the city to accomplish some of the things that would mitigate the severe climate shifts we're seeing right now?
And I also think, Danny, to the point of offering education. So a lot of times when you are working two jobs and you're trying to make ends meet and you're living paycheck to paycheck, the first thing on your mind is not always the climate. It's usually how to get food on the table. But if you make the two match, the food comes from the earth. And so what I am concerned about is how the cost of healthcare. So if we talk about healthcare and we talk about all of the food that we put in our bodies to eat, and they're not coming from clean farms or other places, we drive the cost of healthcare up. I lost my father at a very young age. He was only 68 and he died of pancreatic cancer. And I think a lot of that had to do with environmental factors. Now, doctors can say that I was wrong, but I really, truly do believe that my father did have some environmental factors that led to him getting cancer. I also do know of a whole family who were born and raised in Glowville, and a lot of the women in that family have lupus. And no one knows where lupus comes from and no one knows how it happens. But how do all of the women in that family have lupus? I think it's from these environmental factors. And so if we could have programs, the Promodora programs, where we're actually putting people who speak each other's languages and know each other's cultures into our neighborhoods to educate people on climate, recycling, how to do community gardening, how to make sure how to do soil testing. Do you know if your garden is good to grow soil? I don't know. So maybe we can use these resources to make sure that we are educating, because I always believe education is the passport to any of our futures, and we'll need to make sure that we're creating and providing these resources to these underserved communities that historically have just not had the same resources.
Absolutely. I mean, we really are at a point in our history where we don't need to rely on dirty sources to travel around or to have energy, that we have this incredible technology to make our buildings more energy efficient and cheaper. And so these dollars that 2A can raise can really help galvanize our city to get quicker, to take advantage of those technologies and make sure that everybody has the opportunity to take advantage of that, not just particular parts of the city that can afford it. So it seems like particularly important. One thing we haven't talked about is this initiative 2A actually came from a task force made up of a very diverse set of stakeholders across the city. And they actually brought their message, their recommendations to you, Councilwoman, and you and your colleagues actually voted to put this before the voters. Was there anything impressive about that just the diversity and the range of people that came together, or how much energy they put into coming up with this idea or the solution when they came to you? What were you thinking when you were voting on this a month or two ago when you put this on the ballot?
So the thoughtfulness behind the task force, the robust outreach that they do, I think I like this term called reflective representation. So it needs to be reflective of all the people. I feel that that task force did that. And I'll be honest, there was this young gentleman, his name is Sebastian, and he was a senior. And my daughter, he's in the same class as my daughter. They were the class of 2020. And that class did not have prom. That class did not have graduation. And every time that I watched those task force meetings, he was there leading the charge. And it resonated to he and my daughter started at East High School together, although my daughter ended up graduating from North. I just kept thinking to myself, that's the next 7 generations that I believe in, to get people all the way from somebody who's my mom's age, who's 78, who be able to drill down in a comprehensive fashion and be able to communicate to that demographic and that age group, yet also engage the new, who I always tell my daughter, they're the new voting power. They're going to be the ones who can actually change votes. My daughter, this was the first time that she was able to vote in an election, and it's a presidential election. And she told me when we were voting, she said, Mom, my generation could change the votes. And she goes, and nobody's paying attention. Nobody's taking us serious. And I said, yes, they are, Bella. They are, more than you know. And that's a gentleman like Sebastian. So when I saw, that's what I think of reflective representation is, can somebody speak to my daughter who just voted and get this message across to her, all the way to someone like her grandma, and be able to still get that message across, and all different types of demographics and socioeconomic diversity. And I saw them bring that through their report.
That's great. Yeah. Well, we'll see if there's any questions coming up on Facebook. But before we do, just a reminder, I mean, to vote in this election, you should have gotten a ballot in the mail. If you didn't, it's not too late. You can still register to vote by going into, by contacting the Denver City Clerk and Recorder's Office. If you have your ballot, though, it is too late to put it in the mail. Please do not put that ballot in the mail. There are drop locations that you could be putting your ballots in, or you can go and vote in person as well. There's some voting centers too. There is a state resource, Go Vote Colorado, that has information about voter registration. There's also a website, Just Vote Colorado, that can help you find polling locations too. And so it's really important. We have a week left. It might seem like a lot if you haven't voted yet, but really, now is the time to sit down and fill out your ballot. We're hoping you vote yes on 2A, this climate initiative that we've been talking about. But it's most important that you get those ballots in. And like I said, it's too late to put it in the mail at this point. Make sure you're dropping it off at one of the voting locations. Some of us have already voted. And Nita, where did you vote? Did you drop it off at a location? Did you vote in person? How did you do that?
Oh, no, I went ahead and dropped it off.
Great.
I went and dropped it off at one of the rec centers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's locations all across our area, so it
Exactly.
should be quite convenient. Danielle, are there any questions that we're getting right now? And if not, I'll see if there's any other points that people wanted to make.
Not at the moment.
Okay, great. So any last thoughts from anyone about Climate 2A and why you're supportive, or anything that we haven't covered at this point?
Well, I just want to thank our councilwoman and city council for putting this on the ballot. I think it's long overdue. We were talking about potentially other ballot initiatives. So I was really happy that this occurred and people have the opportunity to really make a change by using their vote and their voice.
That's great. Absolutely. Yeah, we're very, very appreciative of that. And if you want more information about this initiative, you can go to Servicio de la Raza's website. There's a informational tab there. There's also a campaign website, yeson2a.com. And again, this is all about making an investment in our future and working to tackle climate change while bringing real solutions to our community, solutions like renewable energy and energy efficient buildings, and better transportation options, things that will not only benefit us by helping to tackle the places where pollution is put into our air that's causing climate change, but it's providing a lot of other benefits too, from helping to reduce costs, to giving us better travel options, to just making our communities better and increasing the quality of life for all of us. Anything you'd like to say, Councilwoman?
Yeah, I would like to thank Councilman Clark. I got elected last June 4th, and I got sworn in July 15th. And before me was a proposal to actually tax some of our small businesses and do a tax with Excel. And we had enough votes, I think, to get it through almost. And he was able to come to a compromise with Mayor Hancock. And Mayor Hancock actually in 2019 set in the 2020 budget and opened up an office to actually start this task force and allow it to move forward. So I would like to thank our mayor, Michael Hancock, for making sure that he was working with City Council and hearing our desperate cry to make sure that we had an office, not just the Denver Department of Denver Health, but an office on climate change, and that was our priority, or else none of this would have been possible. And to Nita's point, go vote. I voted. My husband, my daughter, and our daughter, we dropped ours off at Scheitler. I don't ever really put a stamp on it. I think it's just better to go drop it off. I think it's actually kind of fun to put it into the ballot box. And for those people who feel a little bit nervous, who have heard about this being a regressive tax and impacting the middle class, I don't make a lot of money on city council. I make a decent wage, but my husband and we always say we're in the middle class crunch. So I just know that tons of the people that I represent in Northwest Denver agree on this. And so I ask that you also just spend $100 on 25 cents is not very much if you think about it. How much people spend on coffee and how much people probably spend on masks right now that we all have to wear during the pandemic. I think we can all afford 25 cents on $100. So I think it's an investment in our future. And according to your website, what I loved, this quote was on the website, was that it's our responsibility. We have a basic responsibility to leave a better world for our kids, but unchecked pollution is putting the health and future of our children at risk. And I have 2 children. I know Nita as a grandma, and so I feel like we are doing this for the next 7 generations of Denverites.
Absolutely. I mean, these dollars will be so critical. We actually did have a question come in at the last minute. Danielle, do you want to say what the question is, and we can answer that?
Sure. It's a little bit of a 2-part. It says, or it's one question, but they have a little prefaced comment. As was mentioned, 50% of collected funds go to vulnerable communities. The proposition language says that fund managers will endeavor to invest with a strong lens towards equity, justice, race, and social justice. I'm curious about how, quote unquote, to endeavor will be operationalized. Also, will impacted, often voiceless communities have input on defining the endeavors and developing relevant solutions?
Yeah, I think the task force we mentioned earlier is a good example. I think that provided a model for how the city can be making these investments and bringing people into the conversations. And so the money will be going to the what the councilwoman was referencing earlier, there's a new office of sustainability and climate resiliency that is going to that office, and there'll be a citizens sustainability council that will be advising how those dollars are spent, and there'll be an open process, and they have to come up with a plan every year on how they're going to use those dollars that all of us in the community will be able to influence, like we do, a regular city council vote. So those are the different ways that we'll be able to hold this process accountable to fulfilling the words on the page, so to speak. Great. Well, on that note, again, please make sure you vote. It's too late to put it in the mail, so put it in one of those drop boxes or go vote in person. Vote yes on Climate 2A. And thank you so much to our panelists today. Thank you for helping us to bring this information out. And thank you to Servicios de la Raza for hosting this. It's so important that we get this information out to the public.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Good night. Thank you.
Go vote. Go vote.